Here is what nobody is telling you. Since Peter Obi left the Labour Party and planted his flag in the new Nigerian People's Party, now rebranded as the New Democratic Coalition, the NDC, political analysts have been asking one question: is this man finished? They are asking the wrong question. The right question is this: why did Datti Baba-Ahmed, the man who stood beside Obi on that historic 2023 ticket, choose this moment, with 2027 less than 2 years away, to publicly distance himself from Obi's new political direction? Not 6 months ago, not after the election dust settled, now. Because in Nigerian politics, timing is never accidental. And Obi's response, what he said, how he said it, and more importantly, what he deliberately did not say, may be the most calculated political communication this election cycle has produced. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, welcome. Niger Inside Desk exists for one reason: to give you the kind of analysis that goes beyond the headlines and the noise. Subscribe now, because this conversation is about to get deeper. To understand what is happening between Obi and Datti, you need to understand what the 2023 presidential ticket actually was and what it was not. It was not a merger of two political minds with a shared ideological framework. It was a coalition of necessity. The Labour Party, largely a vehicle for trade unions with no serious presidential infrastructure, was handed a national moment by the Obedient movement, a largely youth-driven, diaspora-amplified wave of civic energy that was never fully owned by the party structure itself. Datti Baba-Ahmed, a telecommunications entrepreneur and academic from Kaduna State, brought something specific to that ticket: Northern Muslim credibility. In a country where the presidency is informally rotated by religion and region, Datti's presence was a deliberate signal that Obi's candidacy was not a Southeast Christian project, it was a national one. That signal worked to a degree. Obi and Datti pulled over 6 million votes. They came third, but they cracked the South-South, held significant ground in Lagos, and, critically, demonstrated that a third-party candidacy could be competitive in a way Nigeria had not seen in decades. Then came the fractures. Obi's departure from Labour was not a quiet exit. It was a contested, sometimes bitter separation, involving accusations about the party's internal direction, the influence of old-guard Labour leadership, and questions about who truly owned the movement that had made Obi viable in the first place. When Obi moved to the NDC, he did not take everyone with him, and Datti, publicly, deliberately, did not follow. The trigger event here is not just Datti's statement. It is when it came. It came at the precise moment that Nigeria's political landscape is beginning its pre-2027 realignment. Parties are repositioning, alliances are being tested, and anyone who wants a place at the 2027 table needs to plant their flag now, or risk being left out of the negotiations. Datti is planting his flag. The question is, where? There is something about how Obi structured his NDC move that most commentators have completely ignored, and it has direct implications for whether this party can survive the pressure INEC is about to put on it. We will get to that. Let us talk about the institutional landscape Obi is navigating. The NDC, the New Democratic Coalition, is not a legacy party. It does not have the ward-level structures of the PDP. It does not have the state governor network of the APC. What it has is name recognition borrowed from Peter Obi himself, and a base of supporters whose loyalty is to a person, not a platform. That is a structural vulnerability, and INEC knows it. Under Nigeria's Electoral Act, a political party must demonstrate presence across at least 2/3 of the 36 states to contest a presidential election. It must have registered members, functional state offices, and a verifiable internal party structure. These are not formalities. INEC has used them before against smaller parties to disqualify candidates on technicalities that had nothing to do with their popularity. The NDC's challenge is this: it must convert Obi's personal brand into genuine party infrastructure before the 2027 electoral calendar makes that conversion impossible. The window for that work is now. It is not in 2026, it is not after primaries, it is now in the quiet period when no cameras are rolling and no rallies are happening. Meanwhile, consider what INEC itself is dealing with. The Commission is still managing the political fallout from the 2023 elections, the tribunal processes, the credibility questions, the debates about BVAS data and result transmission. Any party that wants to challenge the system credibly in 2027 must be litigation-proof. Every delegate list, every primary, every internal election must be clean enough to withstand a tribunal. For Obi and the NDC, that means the Datti situation is not just a personal rupture, it's an institutional problem. If the man who was his running mate in 2023 is publicly signaling doubts about Obi's new direction, opposition lawyers will use that in every courtroom they can find. Which brings us to a question the political establishment doesn't want ordinary Nigerians asking. Has the NDC been structured to last, or has it been structured to serve a single electoral cycle?
Stop. Before we go further, think about this. Every major Nigerian politician who has won the presidency in the Fourth Republic did so by consolidating the North first, then negotiating the South. Obi is attempting to reverse that formula. That is either genius or the most expensive political miscalculation of this decade. Now let us talk strategy. Obi's response to the Datti situation has been measured, careful, deliberate. He has not fired back. He has not gone on social media to relitigate 2023. He has not sent proxies to attack Datti's character. In a political environment where ego-driven escalation is the default response to perceived betrayal, Obi's restraint is itself a communication. What is it communicating? First, that he does not need Datti to validate his 2027 narrative. The NDC's pitch to voters is that Obi represents a break from the old parties, not a coalition of political veterans brokering power behind closed doors. Every time Obi appears above the fray, he reinforces that contrast. Responding aggressively to Datti would make him look like every other politician. Second, that he is playing a longer game. The 2027 election is not won by the candidate who dominates the news cycle in mid-2025. It is won by the candidate whose coalition is still intact when voting day arrives. Obi's silence is an investment in coalition stability, a signal to wavering NDC supporters that their leader does not burn bridges impulsively. Third, and this is where it gets strategically interesting, Obi's silence may be a negotiating posture, not with Datti specifically, but with the broader northern political establishment watching how this plays out. If Obi can demonstrate that he absorbs political pressure without retaliating, he becomes a more attractive coalition partner for northern political actors who themselves are unhappy with the current direction of the APC but are not yet ready to commit to an alternative. Now, who gains from the Datti-Obi rupture? The Tinubu administration gains a new cycle that fragments opposition attention. The PDP gains a potential opening to court Datti or his network as part of its own 2027 realignment. And within the obedient movement itself, hardliners gain ammunition for an argument they have been making since 2023, that Obi's coalition was always held together by hope rather than structure, and that hope without infrastructure is not a political strategy. Who loses? Northern progressive voters who backed Obi in 2023 on the implicit promise that the Obi-Datti ticket represented a new kind of cross-religious, cross-regional politics. If that pairing is publicly broken, the NDC must work significantly harder to reassure northern Muslim voters that Obi's 2027 candidacy is in fact not a sectional project dressed in pan-Nigerian language. But here is what I have not told you yet, and this is the part that changes how you read everything that has come before. The institution that may actually determine whether Obi's NDC survives long enough to contest 2027 is not INEC, it is not the courts, it is an institution most political analysts have stopped talking about. We will get to it after we look at what this means for the country as a whole. Here is a number that should stop you cold. In the 2023 presidential election, over 93 million Nigerians were registered to vote. Less than 27 million actually did. That means over 66 million Nigerians, 2/3 of the registered electorate, decided that no candidate on offer was worth their time. The Obi-Datti rupture is not just a political story, it's a story about whether those 66 million people will ever come back. The Datti situation and Obi's response to it matters for Nigeria beyond the electoral arithmetic. It matters because of what it tells us about the structural health of opposition politics in this country. Nigeria needs a credible opposition, not for sentimental democratic reasons, though those matter, but for concrete governance reasons. When the ruling party knows it faces no serious electoral challenge, it has no incentive to deliver results. The APC's 2023 victory was not a mandate built on policy performance. It was a product of incumbency advantage, security agency deployment, and an opposition that was divided before election day arrived. If the NDC fractures before 2027, the most likely beneficiary is not a reformed PDP or a newly energized third force. The most likely beneficiary is the status quo. On the economic front, investor confidence in Nigeria's political stability, already fragile, is sensitive to signals about opposition coherence. A country where the ruling party faces no credible challenge is not a democracy that international capital treats as a reliable, long-term partner. The rupture between Obi and Datti is small news to Eurobond traders in London, but it is one more data point in a pattern that serious institutional investors are watching. On security, and this is a point that does not receive enough attention, the Obi-Datti relationship was also a symbolic bridge across the fault lines that Boko Haram, banditry, and farmer-herder conflicts have deepened. A functional, publicly unified Obi-Datti partnership said something to Nigerians living in Zamfara, in Benue, in Plateau states where communal violence has felt irrelevant to daily survival. That symbolic value, once broken, is very difficult to rebuild. For Nigerians at the bottom of the economic pyramid, the keke nabeb driver in Onitsha, the market woman in Kano, the subsistence farmer in Borno, the real question is not who wins 2027. It is whether the political class of any party or coalition is structurally capable of governing differently. The Obi-Datti story is, at its core, a story about whether difference is possible. And right now, the answer is unclear. Nigeria's internal opposition dynamics are not watched closely in Brussels or Washington the way, say, South Africa's or Kenya's are. But they are not invisible either. The United States, through both the State Department and USAID's democracy and governance programming, has invested significantly in Nigerian electoral infrastructure since 2015. American foreign policy in West Africa is increasingly focused on democratic resilience in the face of the coup wave that has swept through Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Niger. Nigeria, the largest economy, the most populous country, the informal anchor of ECOWAS, is treated as the test case for whether West African democracy can hold. An opposition that is visibly fracturing 2 years before a presidential election is to American and European observers a warning sign. Not because they prefer Obi to Tinubu, Western governments rarely take sides at that level of specificity in Nigerian politics, but because a non-competitive election in Nigeria in 2027 would validate every argument being made by military governments across the region that democracy is incapable of producing accountability. For the African Union, the Obi-Datti dynamic connects to a broader question about whether ethnically and religiously plural states can sustain cross-identity political coalitions. The AU has been watching the collapse of such coalitions across the continent, in Sudan, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, with deep concern. Nigeria's ability to produce and sustain a Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Fulani coalition politics would be, if it works, one of the most consequential democratic experiments on the continent. For the Nigerian diaspora, particularly in the UK and the United States, who were among the most vocal obedient movement supporters in 2023, the Datti development lands as a moment of reckoning. Many Nigerians in diaspora invested not just enthusiasm, but real money in the 2023 campaign. The question they are asking now in group chats from Lagos to London to Atlanta is the same question Nigerians at home are asking. Was 2023 a movement or was it a moment?
Earlier, I promised you something about how Obi structured his NDC move that most analysts have ignored. Here it is. The NDC's registration was not done through the conventional party-building route of aggregating existing political structures. It was done by leveraging a network of civil society and professional associations that have no formal party affiliation but have significant organizational reach. That is a structural innovation, but it also means the NDC has no tested internal conflict resolution mechanism. When factions emerge, and they will, there is no established precedent for how they are resolved. That is the institutional vulnerability Obi's team has not yet addressed publicly. Now, let us be fair to the counter-arguments, because the most dangerous analysis is the kind that only confirms what you already believe. The strongest argument on the other side runs like this. The Datti Obi rupture is being significantly overstated by a media class that benefits from political drama. Obi and Datti were never ideologically identical. They were a ticket of convenience. Their separation does not mean the coalition that voted for them in 2023 has dissolved. It means the political superstructure above that coalition is reorganizing. The voters are still there. The anger at the APC and PDP is still there. The NDC does not need Datti specifically to channel that energy. That is a reasonable argument, and it would be more convincing if Nigerian politics rewarded coalition building over personality politics. But it does not consistently. Nigeria's electoral history is littered with movements that were larger than their leaders, until the leaders left and the movements discovered they were not. The second counter-argument is this. Obi's move to the NDC was strategically correct precisely because it freed him from the Labour Party's internal contradictions. The Labour Party's old guard was never ideologically aligned with the obedient movement. The NDC gives Obi structural ownership of his political vehicle in a way he never had in Labour. Again, a fair point, but structural ownership of a small new party is only an advantage if the party can scale before the electoral calendar closes the window. The jury on that is still very much out. The most common misconception circulating on Nigerian social media right now is that Datti's distancing is a product of personal betrayal, that this is about wounded pride or broken promises between two individuals. It is not. It is about two men with different assessments of where the political opportunity lies in 2027. Datti is reading the terrain and making a bet. Obi is reading the same terrain and making a different bet. One of them will be proven right. Nigerian voters, if they turn out, will be the judges. Here's the scenario nobody in the Nigerian commentariat is modeling. What if both Obi and Datti end up on the ballot in 2027, on different tickets? What does that do to the Northern Progressive vote? What does it do to the Southeast Bloc? What does it do to a Tinubu re-election bid that is already navigating a cost of living crisis and a security environment that has not materially improved? Run that scenario and the 2027 election looks nothing like 2023. Three most likely next moves from the key actors. From Obi, expect a deliberate northern outreach campaign conducted largely out of the media spotlight. Quiet meetings with traditional rulers, religious leaders, and civil society figures in the Northwest and Northeast. The goal is to demonstrate that the NDC has genuine northern buy-in that does not depend on Datti. Watch for NDC state-level gubernatorial announcements in northern states. Those will be the first real test of whether the party's northern infrastructure is functional or cosmetic. From Datti Baba-Ahmed, watch for a carefully managed ambiguity. He is unlikely to formally align with the APC or PDP this early. His leverage depends on remaining uncommitted.
every week he stays uncommitted, his value to potential coalition partners increases. The moment he commits, that leverage disappears. Do not expect a formal declaration before the first quarter of 2026 at the earliest. From the Tinubu administration, expect continued quiet pressure on the NDC's registration status and internal processes, channeled through INEC's bureaucratic mechanisms rather than overt political interference. The administration does not need to attack Obi directly. It needs the NDC to implode under its own structural weight before 2027 primaries begin. The signals to watch in the coming months. First, NDC state-level elections. If the party holds credible internal elections in at least 18 states before mid-2026, it is building real infrastructure. If those elections are delayed, disputed, or conducted without transparency, that's a structural red flag. Second, the obedient movement's relationship with the NDC. The movement has never fully institutionalized itself within any party structure. If key obedient organizers begin publicly distancing themselves from the NDC the way they eventually distanced themselves from Labour, that's a more significant warning sign than anything Datti says. Third, Northern governors' body language toward the Tinubu administration. If the fractures within the APC's northern bloc deepen through late 2025 and into 2026, the political space for an Obi-led alternative expands considerably. If those fractures close, the NDC's path to the presidency narrows sharply. The 12-month outlook. The NDC will likely survive as a functioning party, but will face at least one serious internal crisis before the end of 2025. The 3-year outlook. If Obi contests 2027 and comes second, not third, that's a political victory that changes the landscape for 2031, even if he doesn't win. If he comes third again, the obedient movement's electoral future is genuinely uncertain. We began with a question. Why did Datti choose this moment? Here's the answer. Datti chose this moment because the pre-2027 window is open right now and it will not stay open. The political actors who wait for perfect clarity before committing will find when they finally commit that all the available space has been taken. Datti is positioning. He is not betraying. He is doing what every serious political actor in Nigeria's Fourth Republic has done when the electoral calculus shifted. He is reassessing his options and acting before the window closes. Obi's response, measured, deliberate, withholding, is positioning. It is the response of a man who has decided that the Datti chapter is a cost worth absorbing if it frees the NDC to build a broader, more durable coalition before 2027. Whether that calculation is correct, we do not yet know. What we do know is this. The 2027 election will not be determined by what any politician says in a press conference. It will be determined by whether the NDC can build real party infrastructure in the north, whether the 66 million registered voters who stayed home in 2023 decided that this time their vote is worth casting, and whether the APC's incumbency advantage is enough to survive an economy that is still inflicting daily pain on ordinary Nigerians. One thread I am watching, and that I will return to in a future analysis. What happens to the Kwankwaso factor? The NNPP is still standing. Rabiu Kwankwaso has not committed to any alliance, and in a tight three-way race, he may be the most powerful man in the room, not because he will win, but because of who he decides to help. If this analysis gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.